Hello friends, Buddy here at House of Props, and this week's project is this 3D printed 501st Clonetrooper helmet. All the various Clonetrooper helmets are pretty cool in their own right, but the reason I chose the 501st version is simply because blue is my favorite color and I like the blue detailing. Now, over the years, we've been able to see the 501st in the animated series like the Clone Wars and live versions in the Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Mandalorian, and the Ahsoka series. But I have to give a shout out to Adam Savage for his amazing behind-the-scenes footage of the Clonetrooper costume over at FBFX, which really helped me get all the details just right. When working on this helmet, I wanted to switch up some of my painting techniques and try some new things. So for this project, I ended up using some liquid latex and rubbing alcohol to achieve some really cool effects. Let me show you what I mean, and let's get started. To my knowledge, we got the first live version of the 501st in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, which was then followed with this Grogu rescue flashback in Season 3 of The Mandalorian, and there were also some flashbacks in the Ahsoka series as well. And last fall, when Ollie's bargain outlets were getting in a ton of Hasbro overstock, they got this Trooper figure, and since it was only $8.99, I brought it home. Even though it's only 6 inches, it came in really helpful when laying out all the paint details that were needed. But first I needed to sculpt it and print it, and anyone who's ever printed a helmet knows it's no short process, so I'll skip that part and jump ahead. Once the pieces were finished printing, I do an initial sanding with some 220 grit on my hand sander to begin to smooth away the print lines. While I do that, I would really appreciate it if you would click the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. It's completely free to you and it'll just help this channel grow. And if you click the notification bell, you can get notified when new projects are released. Thank you. After the 220, I make another pass with some 240 grit, and since I print the pieces with a layer height of 0.09, the layers aren't super defined and the sanding needed before assembly doesn't take nearly as long. I've already attached the front pieces and thought I filmed, but apparently I didn't. So, to begin the assembly, I started with the face of the helmet and I'm going to use 2 glues. First, I take some E6000 and apply this in sections along the seam. I'm leaving some gaps for the next glue, but the reason I'm using E6000 is it maintains a better bond over time and is less likely to split. The second glue is CA glue, and I apply this where I left gaps in the E6000. This glue cures faster than the E6000 and will allow assembly to continue faster. I have found using the 2 glues like this works really well. I don't end up with any hairline cracks later on during handling and painting like I have in the past. Once the glue is in place, I align the pieces very carefully, taking the time at this stage to make sure the surfaces are aligned as evenly and as smoothly as possible will save time later on. And once I'm happy with the positioning, I apply a few drops of zip kicker to the CA glue spots, which will now cure in just a few seconds, but the E6000 will continue to cure for a few hours yet. Then the small connector point can be attached, and since it's such a small area, I just use the CA glue. Next, the earmuff looking pieces can be attached to either side of the face with both glues. Then a back piece can be glued onto each earmuff piece, again using both glues. Then the center seam between the back pieces can be aligned and glued together. Now that just leaves the dome of the helmet. I started with the front pieces and glued those into place, and then to each other. And then the back dome pieces can be attached. And with that, the assembly is complete, but to add a little more protection to the seams, I apply some beads of E6000 to the inside of the helmet. This will just reinforce the seams. I let the helmet sit overnight to make sure the E6000 is completely cured before proceeding. Then it was time to clean up the seams between the pieces. To do that, I'm using some of this glazing and spot putty. This stuff is toxic, so make sure you use your PPE. To apply, I use a plastic palette knife and smear the putty onto the seams. You want to really push it down into the seams and apply a generous amount because the putty does shrink a little as it dries and you may find the seams will still be visible. If so, no worries. Just apply a little more and let it dry. I let that dry for 2 hours, then sand down the putty with some 120 grit. You could use a hand sander if you want, but I've found 2 things. It's not difficult to sand by hand, and working in a circular motion will help get the surface smooth. If you sand too much away and reopen the seams again, don't worry, you can easily add some more to these spots and resand. But I've generally found that if I apply a thick layer, it'll do the job and nothing will open back up. At this point, all the seams are pretty smooth, but the helmet is not quite smooth enough for it to look super clean. To help make everything smooth and even, I thin some of the putty with some acetone and using an old brush apply a decent layer over the entire helmet. This will just help fill in any areas that may still be a little uneven. You could use an old airbrush like I did when I made Grogu's rondelle. It'll give you a really even layer, which is great when working with something that has really fine intricate details like the rear of the rondelle does. But for something large like this helmet, applying an uneven layer with an old brush is just fine. The next steps I'm about to show you will take care of all that and you'll never know. Alright, so once that layer is dry, which it dries really quickly because of the acetone, it can be sanded with some 400 grit sandpaper. This will make a mess, but you can see how the putty has really filled in the 3D print surface, and by adding this step, we were able to reduce the amount of initial sanding that was needed back at the beginning. Usually one coat of the putty acetone combo is enough, but if you feel you've sanded too much, just add a little more, it should be fine. And once that's all sanded, wipe away the remaining residue with a cloth, and then the entire helmet can be sprayed with some 2-in-1 filler and sandable primer. For a project like a helmet, I'll apply 3 coats, but I let each coat dry for a half hour before applying the next. The reason for this is, if it goes on too thick, it can run or drip, and that just means more cleanup time, and nobody got time for that. So thin and even is the way to go. After the primer's dry, the helmet can be sanded again with the 400 grit. It's at this point we're really going to try and get that super smooth, shiny surface needed for Clonetroopers and Stormtroopers, and sanding like this and making sure to get into all the creases and surfaces will. You can see a little here how just this step is starting to give the helmet a shiny surface, which in this case shiny means smooth. When finished with the 400, wipe down the helmet to remove the dust and we can begin wet sanding. When wet sanding, I work in small manageable sections by applying a layer of water onto the helmet with a fine bristle brush. Then, using some 1000 grit sandpaper, I sand the wet area in a circular motion. You can't see it, but you'll feel how the surface takes on a very slick, smooth texture. When the residue is wiped away, look at the shine on this so far. It's at this point the helmet can be sprayed with a glossy white spray paint, and for this project I'm using a pretty cheap paint, which means I'll need to apply several layers to get even complete coverage. It's what I had in the studio and I didn't have time to run to the store for a better quality paint, but again, thin layers will still work. In total it took 5 coats, but as you can see, no one would ever guess that this was 3D printed or that it was originally 12 different pieces. Now it's time to start painting all the details. I begin with the sunken area around the back of the helmet, and to tape off large areas I'll use painter's tape around the edges and plastic grocery bags for larger areas. And for these gray areas on the helmet, a coat of the 2-in-1 primer is the perfect shade of gray. After the gray dries, I hide it and expose the black areas. I started with the ring around the dome and the greeblies on the earmuffs, and I'll come back to the mouth area and the vents a little later on. These areas I paint with some gloss black spray paint. I really want to avoid drips and runs with this cheap brand, so yet again I spray multiple thin layers. With all the masking peeled away, this is how the helmet was looking so far, and nothing needed any touch-ups, so I could move on to the wire mesh on the vents. To paint these areas I'm using some mirror chrome, but you could use a metallic silver as well. To paint, I lightly brushed the area because I wanted to only catch the top surface of the mesh and leave the black in the recessed areas. Now it was time to get ready to paint the blue. After a lot of preparation with blue tape and plastic to get the desired shape on the front, over the top, and down the back, it was then time to try out the technique of using the liquid latex as a masking fluid. I got it right after Halloween last year when it went on sale, and had been trying to work up the nerve to use it, and this seemed like the perfect project, so here it goes. Using a small brush, I apply it in spots along the edges, so hopefully it'll look like the edges of the paint are chipping away. I also added some lines that will look like scratches. But I found that it's best to thickly add the latex to spots. I tried thin, but it would just bead up on the surface. After the latex dried, it was time to paint. This paint, called 2 Blue, is actually the perfect hue, and when thinned with some rubbing alcohol works really well in an airbrush. I will often use alcohol as my thinning fluid when airbrushing because it works just as well and it's a lot cheaper. You could paint this by hand, but I wanted to avoid brush marks, and the airbrush is a great way to get a factory looking paint job. When the paint dried, I took the cap from a ballpoint pen and scratched away the latex spots. And I have to say, the latex worked really well, creating spots that looked like authentic aging and chipping. Alright, the last detail needed were the lines on either cheek area. To do this, I simply printed a stencil on regular letter paper, but to make the stencil more durable and reusable for both sides, I applied some blue tape to the back of the paper, and then proceeded to cut out the design with a freshly sharpened hobby knife blade. This was then taped into place. These line details are a darker blue than the helmet decoration, so I'm pouncing the stencil with some royal blue, and since the stencil is more durable, it can be peeled up and used on the other side as well. This way it only needs to be cut once and you don't need to make two. Since I added the scratches and flaking to the blue, I wanted to add a little more aging. To start, I take some dark gray and very thinly airbrush this into spots on the helmet where aging would naturally occur and accumulate. Now, since I'm using alcohol thin paint, if I flick some extra alcohol onto the spots that have been airbrushed, the paint creates a natural splatter effect like so. Isn't that cool? You could also do this with alcohol inks if you wanted. And I just take a paper towel and lightly dab the dark spots. After the dark gray, I switch to some burnt umber, but I don't spray nearly as much as the gray, just enough to add some variation to break up the colors. The same alcohol treatment can be used to add splattering to the umber as well. And again, just a dab with a paper towel to break it up. After all the paint has dried, the paint job is finally finished, and to protect it, I seal it with some glossy clear coat. This will add to the shine and lock all the paint detail in place so it can't be damaged with wear or in transit. I ended up giving the helmet 2 coats to make sure everything was fully protected. After the clear coat has dried, the helmet is almost complete. All that's left is the visor. To make that, I'm using a replacement medical face shield. It's not completely black, in fact they come in a very dark green, but when it's in place on the helmet it looks black to the outside observer. To get the correct shape, an easy way is to take a piece of paper and hold it in place on the inside of the helmet and trace the opening. I then trace this onto the face shield and cut it out, while adding an 1/8 inch around the template. The protective coverings can be peeled away and the visor can be aligned to the inside of the helmet and secured into place with the CA glue we were using earlier. And with that, your 501st Clonetrooper helmet is complete, and between you and me, no one would ever guess it was 3D printed. So here's some close-ups of the effect from the latex, and I have to say I'm really happy with the results. They look like the blue paint is actually chipping away and looks really authentic. I can definitely see myself using this technique on future projects as well. Another plus was this effect with the rubbing alcohol. I've seen other makers using it, but for some reason I've been terrified to try it. I guess it just seemed too easy to mess up, but my fears were uncalled for because it's actually really easy to do and the results are amazing. So that's my take on a 501st Clonetrooper helmet. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to make one of these helmets, I will include a link to the files in the below description. And again, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with friends and family, click the subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll catch you on the next one. Have a great day. And remember, if you are building any of my builds or using any of my templates, feel free and tag me at House of Props on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, because I would really like to see your fantastic work. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.